Jeffrey Toobin's an old and dear friend. He's chief legal analyst for CNN, staff writer at The New Yorker. He's out with a new book called True Crimes and Misdemeanors, The Investigation of Donald Trump, in which he argues that the media's reporting during the Mueller probe may have actually helped the president. Let's find out why as Jeffrey Toobin joins me from New York. I must say, Jeffrey, this is your 8th book. I've read all previous 7. I just started this one. You have an uncanny ability to take legal problems and put it in layman's language. I must salute you.
Well, and I salute you, Larry. What a pleasure to be back on the air with you. You know, I really view the beginning of my television career as with you during OJ at your studio on Sunset Boulevard. I used to describe it as like a salon for OJ people because you met everyone, every single person involved with OJ passed through that studio, and I did some of my best reporting in the green room there. But your friendship and your support for my career was indispensable at a time when I had no gray hair at all, and now it's all gray.
Thank you. All right, before we get to the book, and by the way, I started the book, and this is the kind of book you cannot put down. You have such an ability to write well on legal. It's fantastic. I can't wait to read it all. What do you make of the Kamala Harris appointment?
Well, you know, one of the things I always get a kick out of is that, you know, we in the news media, you know, we make such a big deal out of these vice presidential selections, but you know, how many votes do they really change? I don't think they change any. And you know, the cliche is do no harm, and I certainly think Biden did himself no harm. But it also is important to recognize the possibility that a woman of color could be vice president of the United States. And I think even though this was not a surprising choice, the magnitude of that and the changes that's reflected in the country by that possibility is a very big deal. And, you know, I'm out of the prediction business. I don't know if they'll win, but if they do win, that would be a profound thing to have a woman in that position for the first time.
The one time a vice president did count was when Kennedy named Johnson and won Texas. If Johnson weren't on that ticket, Nixon would have been president.
That's certainly what I've always heard. I think those days are pretty much over, though, where you could pick a vice presidential candidate who could deliver a state. You know, our politics are so nationalized now. You think about who the possibilities are that Biden could have named. I don't know if any of them could have delivered a state, but you know, we'll see.
Chief Justice John Roberts, appointed by George W. Bush earlier this month. Vice President Mike Pence declared him a disappointment to conservatives. Is he tough to read, the Chief Justice?
Well, I think, you know, this was a very different Chief Justice Roberts this term than we saw before. I mean, I don't think anyone should be under the impression that John Roberts has turned into some kind of liberal. He is certainly no Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who went to which high school?
Madison, I think.
James Madison, like many great Americans, right? Yeah. So John Roberts has not turned into some kind of liberal, but it is also true that this was a different John Roberts this term. You know, he voted to strike down the abortion law in Louisiana. He voted to, you know, say that Title VII, the anti-discrimination law, covered discrimination against gay people. He said that the Trump administration, you know, had violated the rules when it tried to end the protection for Dreamers and when it tried to put a citizenship question on the census. That's different than the John Roberts we saw in the previous 14 years he's been on the court. And I think it reflects some real discomfort among mainstream Republicans like John Roberts with the direction of the Trump presidency. You know, I don't think it's accurate to call Roberts a never Trumper, but he is someone who I think has been alienated by how Donald Trump has conducted his presidency.
How far along in your writing this book did the coronavirus develop?
Well, it was very much towards the end. I had to hand in my manuscript pretty much in April, and as you recall, the coronavirus hit in earnest in March, and I thought it was a revealing bookend to this story, because a lot of the behavior that we saw from President Trump, the constant lying, the real distortions of what's going on that that were in the Mueller investigation and the impeachment investigation regarding Ukraine, they have continued with the tragedy of COVID. So obviously, this has been a nightmare for so many Americans and people around the world. But I think it's been a revealing one, because the president's conduct has been of a piece with how he's conducted his entire presidency.
The book is True Crimes and Misdemeanors, the story of the Mueller investigation. Was the Mueller investigation a failure?
I think that's unduly harsh. I think they accomplished a great deal. They pursued their mandate with a great sense of ethics. I think they were very factual in their reporting. They won some very important convictions against prominent people, whether it's Michael Flynn, the national security advisor, Paul Manafort, the Trump's former campaign chairman, Roger Stone, the president's friend. Those are big deal cases, and the report also describes the Russian efforts to manipulate the American electorate in 2016 with incredible detail and persuasiveness. I think there were two big problems with the Mueller investigation. One was his failure to issue a grand jury subpoena to the president and get his testimony. I think that was a real gap. And on the question of obstruction of justice, how the president interacted with his staff, whether it was James Comey telling James Comey to lay off Michael Flynn, whether it was telling his White House counsel, Don McGahn, to fire Mueller, that was obstruction of justice. And I think Mueller really made an error when he didn't say that outright and just spoke clearly about what he should have spoken clearly and said the president committed those crimes. He didn't, and he opened the door for William Barr to really distort Mueller's findings.
By the way, we don't hear about him much. Is Rudy Giuliani in the book?
Oh, he is a protagonist in the book, and Giuliani is I think a particularly fascinating figure, because there are really two sides to him in this story. In the Mueller investigation, I think Giuliani was actually a very effective lawyer. He did two things. He strung out the negotiations about the subpoena in such a way that he managed to avoid having the president to testify, and that was very effective. He also mobilized the conservatives against Mueller. He turned this into a political fight instead of a legal matter. But when it came to Ukraine and Giuliani's efforts to get Ukraine involved and the government of Ukraine to try to sabotage Joe Biden's candidacy, Giuliani was a disaster. He almost single-handedly got his client, Donald Trump, impeached, which is something that I think no lawyer would want on his resume. So the two sides of Giuliani, who was really a major figure in the book, I think are kind of paradoxical and interesting.
Could and should have Mueller subpoenaed Trump?
Yes, I think he should have. And that's another big theme in the book. Mueller was appointed in May of 2017. He started telling Trump's lawyers, who at that time were led by John Dowd and Jay Sekulow, in the fall of 2017, I want to interview the president, which is something he should have done. But they got to the point where there was actually something scheduled in January of 2018, an interview at Camp David. But ultimately, John Dowd pulled the plug. He pulled the plug for the obvious reason that he knew, as anyone knows, that Trump would have lied the way he always lied, including under oath in this circumstance. And at that point, in January of 2018, Mueller could have just pulled the trigger, gotten a subpoena, and fought it out in the courts, probably to have it resolved by the end of June, which only would have been a year into his investigation. What Dowd and then Giuliani did was they sort of stretched out these negotiations, and that allowed the Trump team to sort of run out the clock. And they knew that Mueller didn't want to spend 5 years the way Ken Starr spent 5 years. And that compelled Mueller to accept written questions and answers as opposed to the real question and answer that would have been more appropriate.
With all your investigating experience, was this a tough book to write?
This was the hardest book I've ever had to write. This was a moving target. I agreed to write this book in May of 2017 when Mueller was appointed, but Mueller didn't talk to anybody, and his staff didn't talk to anybody, including me, until they closed up shop. That presented a tremendous reporting challenge. And then the Ukraine story came out of nowhere. I certainly didn't know that there would be a totally separate impeachment proceeding brought. And I had to juggle all this while trying to do the reporting and then the writing. So it was a hard book to write, but I'm very glad I got to tell the whole story. It ends with the president's acquittal in February. Larry, I mean, the president was acquitted in the Senate in February. It's only August now, but doesn't it feel like about 100 years ago? I mean, COVID has so taken over our lives and the news that it seems like, forever ago, but it really wasn't that long. And I feel grateful that I got to tell the whole story, difficult as it was.
Jeffrey, have we ever seen anything remotely like Trump?
Larry, I mean, you've interviewed all these people, including Trump, I know, many times. And I just, every day I remain amazed that Donald Trump is president of the United States. I mean, it's not just the law breaking, which I describe in the book, but just the violation of norms of how we expect presidents to behave. The constant insults, the fighting with the media for no reason. I mean, it's like to compare him to any other president is just impossible because he's not. It's just like no one else we've ever seen.
Do you expect Michael Cohen's book to come out before the election, and do you expect to have impact?
I do expect it to come out before the election. Impact, I think the idea that Michael Cohen will, the thing about this whole election is how many undecided voters really do you think they are? I don't think they are. I mean, Trump is, he has so dominated the news and he's so much out there. The idea that a lot of voters are going to pick up Michael Cohen's book and say, I don't really think he's such a good guy, it just seems inconceivable to me.
One other thing, with mail-in voting being challenged, do you expect a lot of legal challenges to this election? It ain't over on November 3rd.
This is a huge issue, Larry, and I'm spending a lot of time on it now in my reporting. There was just a primary election in New York City on June 23rd in New York State. One of the races, a close primary race, wasn't resolved for 6 weeks because it took so long to count all the mail-in votes. That gives you an idea, and that's just a primary where the turnout is much lower than there is in a general election. I think we are heading to a really scary scenario where the vote counting is not just going to be lengthy, but highly controversial, and I worry that a significant part of the population will not regard the result, whatever it turns out to be, as legitimate.
I can't wait to read the rest of the book. It's so great having you with us, Jeffrey. Continued good luck.
Thanks, pal. It's great to see you.